Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's event, The Future of Education. I'm Eva Chung, the Senior Events Manager at SCMP, and I will be your host for today. Before we start, I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners for today's event. Our appreciation goes out to platinum sponsor Yu Chung International School, our gold sponsors Christian Alliance International School, German Swiss International School, Herald International School, Hong Kong, and the Harbor School. Our strategic partner is Top Schools, and our supporting organization is WISPA. Please feel free to submit questions to our speakers in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can submit your questions at any time during the discussion. Our first webinar for today is the Early Childhood Education, a different voyage of learning, self-discovery, and exploration. And with that, this webinar is moderated by our SCMP senior reporter, Laura Westbrook. And joining her on the panel are Clayton Mullins, Western Co-Principal, Early Childhood Education, Yu Chung International School, Amy Lee Hood, Assistant Co-Principal, Early Childhood Education at Yu Chung International School, Professor Carrie Lee, the Head of Department of Early Childhood Education at the Education University of Hong Kong. Now, without further ado, over to you, Laura, to start the conversation.
Thanks so much, Eva, and a very warm welcome to all our panelists and everyone who's tuning in from wherever you may be. I want to start with you, Clayton. This year has undoubtedly been a year that's been hugely challenging for everyone in the whole world, but especially for educators, I think. Can you just tell us what you've taken away from 2020?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That's a great question to start with. I think one of the key takeaways is typically we've spoken of education and the importance of a homeschool partnership. And I think that this year that has all come to light. We've seen the significant importance of our partnership with families. And within that, I've really recognized the adaptability of teachers, of parents, of children, and the way that they've responded to the challenges that have come time and time again. I've really been encouraged by our parents through this year who have really taken on a lot of responsibility at home, and just the encouragement for our teachers. I've had a number of parents who've actually said that our teachers need a trophy for the work and adaptability that they've gone through. And I'm reminded of 21st century skills, where we're looking at children that are critical thinkers and vast communicators with different means of technology, problem solvers. And if I look at our children, even from the youngest years, is that this year they really have had to engage in those 21st century skills and having to adapt. And just lastly, this last week we're inside a workshop with some leaders from different parts of the world, and there's some leaders from Colombia, Geneva, Switzerland, from India, from Amsterdam, really just covering all the continents. And what stood out was that what we're experiencing is really universal. And in particular, what I really realized was some of the gratitude that we can have for what we have out here in Hong Kong. In particular, some of the leaders in India shared that the only form of communication that they can have with the students is through WhatsApp, because at this time there's no data, they don't have access to internet. So in terms of a key takeaway, I think that it's just really, it's been significant to reflect on some of the privileges that we do have in our context, while incredible challenges, but we have been so lucky to be able to respond the way that we have at our school.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Adaptability and, taking some positive stuff away from the year. Amy Lee, I want to come to you next. What has worked well for teachers and students this year, in the past year?
I think so much. We've just really had to focus on what's working well and continue to be so reflective on that process, Laura. If I think to our experience at YCIS and in our ECE, what's worked really well is kind of the constant collaboration between teachers and families. As Clayton mentioned, our teachers and our families have really been amazing at with their support, with their collaboration, their sharing, just really working together to support young children. And if I think about the e-learning program that we've been able to put together, That's really a huge credit to our teachers for their input, for their continuous reflection on that process. And the teachers really have been able to create something that's really holistic and been able to support learners in their holistic development and learning. So I think from a teacher's perspective, being able to still deliver a program that is holistic to some degree, where we can see children when they come back to school, they're managing. We were so fortunate over October to have a few weeks where we had children back on campus for face-to-face learning. And as a leadership team and as educators, we obviously had concerns about how children would cope with that transition. But we were so blown away by the adaptability, as Caitlin was speaking about, and you as well, Laura, that children had after nearly around, was it 8 months of being at home and coming back to school. We just saw confidence. We saw the relationships that had been built over the e-learning program that we've put together. And we just saw children really thriving being back on campus. So for children, they really are ready. What we're able to offer them as a school puts them in a place where they're really ready to come back to face-to-face learning. And from a teacher's perspective, they really have been able to communicate really strongly and closely with families to make sure that holistic learning continues at home, and we're getting children ready for the day that we can have class back on campus again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? We talk about teachers and students, but families and parents, or people who are looking after the children are such a key part of the last year. And Kerry, I want to come to you next. You and your colleagues released a study exploring parents' views on online learning and screen time during the class suspension during COVID-19. Can you just share with us what your key findings from that study were?
Thank you, Laura. This was a study that my colleague Eva Lau led, and we conducted this during the actually straight after the third month of school closure last year. And we were blown away when we did this. Usually we really have to struggle to get parents and families to participate in that. But over a long weekend, we had over 6,000 participants through a Facebook platform. And what we found in that study was that at that stage, I must emphasize that this was at an early stage last year. At that stage, there was quite a bit of dissatisfaction with online learning. We found that a lot of children had difficulties with online learnings, and much of the difficulties came from difficulties engaging with the material, and also getting enough support, really. Parents found it difficult because they may not have the environment at home that's conducive to learning. They may not have the material that is needed to help the children along. So at that stage, most parents actually wanted more interactive learning from teachers. And through our interaction with our students and with our stakeholders out there, we found that it was quite hard because folks weren't prepared for it. It came out of the blue, and also I think the worst thing was that we didn't know how long this was going to last. So in terms of the amount of engagement, management, or others were prepared to put into online learning, at that stage, things were just really quite unclear. So I'm very glad this morning that to hear from Clayton and Amy Lee that things are going so well at their school.
Yeah, it is, teachers and everyone, they've adapted so well to kind of this fast-paced online learning environment, kind of becoming experts very quickly in that field. I want to stay with you, Clayton, though, and Kerry, sorry, I want to stay with you. And it's kind of go back to basics here. Can you just explain to us, how do children learn?
Well, shall I start with that?
Kerry, yes, sorry.
Okay.
Please do.
Okay, how do children learn? That's a big question. Now, I'm not sure if the way in which children learn has changed that much. Certainly, if we look back at the last 20 years, last 30 years, the fundamental, and I'm talking about the psychological or the biological fundamentals, in the way in which children learn probably hasn't changed that much. But society has changed, the environment has changed, and the external stimuli have changed. So that certainly forces some changes in the way and the things that children learn. If we go back to maybe the 70s or the 80s, we don't have portable electronic device. I remember many years ago now, my uncle once said to me, oh, not too long from now, we can, rather than having to take the newspaper into the bathroom with us, we'll just take a little computer. And I thought, you must be nuts. A big desktop computer, you know, this was back in the 80s, but you know, these days it's a common day occurrence, right? So the way in which we interact with the world has changed. And do we need to change the way in which we teach children, young children, and the way in which we prepare children for this digital world? I think, yes, we do need to. But in terms of the fundamentals, that probably hasn't changed that much.
And Kerry, can you just explain to us what play-based learning is and why it's important?
Well, that's quite a contentious issue. Play-based issue is certainly a very active area of research around the world. And folks define play-based learning very differently. So I worked in Singapore for many years, and there it was talked about in terms of purposeful play. And I remember one time interacting with a child. I was trying to teach him how to play an online game, and then he turned around and said, "You're trying to teach me something, aren't you?" So I think children are very sensitive to play versus not playing. In Hong Kong, the curriculum guide focuses on free play. So if we look at the literature, play is often defined as something that is motivated by interest, something that children get to define by themselves. They set the rules by themselves, and it's not imposed upon by external bodies, teachers, for example. So in our work going into kindergartens, we don't often see free play per se. We often see some kind of structured play. And in fact, we recently published an article talking about the need to contextualize play to local conditions.
It's fascinating. And I want to come to you, Clayton. You know, jumping off from what Kerry was just saying, can you just share with us how play-based learning in a school setting enables children to kind of explore new concepts?
Yeah, I was actually loving listening to Kerry there, because I think with us, this is such a great conversation, and the different schools or different environments have interpreted play differently. And I think that's why in some contexts it isn't as successful, because of the way that the school has tried to implement it. If we go back to one of the most intelligent people in the world, Albert Einstein, who we're all very familiar with, when he spoke about play, he said that play is the highest form of research. I mean, let that sink in for a bit. He realized that play was so significant. And I think a real shame in the English context is that the word play has really been turned into a word that we associate when we're doing things that are more relaxed or things that aren't as important. And we've kind of built that around the word of play, where if we take it back to Einstein, play is the highest form of research. And what Kerry was sharing is that it's just about that's the way that children take these concepts from the world around them. And this is where I love that story where Kerry was saying that he tried to share something with the child, and the child looked at him and said, "Are you trying to teach me something?" And I think about us as researchers. If we're researching something, we don't always want somebody intervening and disrupting, because when children are playing, play in their mind is that they are engaging as scientists, mathematicians, they are problem solvers. They are doing a task in their mind which is really important, significant, and they're engaging in something that is incredibly meaningful. I think the real shame is that we haven't realized that when children are engaging in play, how important it is. And I think the tendency is we allocate 15 minutes to play and then we interrupt them. And imagine if you were an adult and you were trying to engage in this big research, and you know how long it takes for us to get our minds engaged. And you imagine every 15 or let's say half an hour, somebody came and told you had to stop doing that and you had to change and do something else. And when we constantly do that, we actually send the message to children that we don't necessarily value what's important to you. So for us as educators in our environment, the importance is for us as a teaching body to really understand what children are doing when they're playing. For us as educators to learn how to be strategic in adding. So Vygotsky speaks about the zone of proximal development. How do we strategically introduce new concepts so children can take hold of that and extend their learning further? It's a fine line because you don't want to be caught in a situation that Kerry spoke about where the children look at you and say, you're really disrupting me. But we want to continue to add and expand so that children take these concepts and they figure them out and they expand their learning through that. So at YCS, we really value play. Internationally, it's really valued, and we think that it is, as Albert Einstein has said, the highest form of research.
And just staying with you, Clayton, so how does play-based learning prepare children for primary school?
Yeah, so there are two different angles I would like to respond to this with. So firstly, the importance is for your teachers to understand that there are early learning goals. So for us at YCS, we look at the EYFS. They've got 7 early learning goals that cover all areas from personal, social, and emotional, maths, literacy, knowledge of the world, creativity, physical development. So our teachers are observing children, and from the youngest of ages, they're picking up when a child is needing additional support. And within a play-based program, we can have something called a provocation, where we identify that through the child's natural interest in play, that they might not necessarily be developing in, let's say, fine motor skills. So our teachers would be intentional to strategically create opportunities for children to further develop that. And we work very closely with our primary school, and I think that's one of the benefits that we have as a through-trained school, which other schools might not necessarily have, where our primary school teachers come into the ECE as early as our 3-year-old classes, and they really partner with us, and we have conversations with our primary school, and that helps us prepare children holistically to go through to primary. One of the things that we've had feedback from our primary school is when children get to year 3, they've shared that while children coming from the local kindergarten environment and children coming from our environment, everyone has those skills of writing, the skills of reading. But the real difference was that children that had engaged in our play-based environment, who had used their imagination, who had thought about different concepts and ideas and expanded on their imaginary world, when it comes to writing an assignment in the year 3 classroom, they found that there was a staggering contrast in the ability of our children that had come through a play-based environment to put in creative thoughts into paper, to be able to really write these pieces in English that were really creative and really thoughtful, where children that had been through an environment that was dictated to them, they didn't really have opportunity to explore and to drive their own interests and learnings. They had the skills of reading and writing, but they were really limited in their ability to think out of the box. And we know going into the future that those are the things that businesses and the working world are really looking for, that creative thinking and problem solving and creativity.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, isn't it? And Amy Lee, I want to come to you next, because jumping off what Clayton was saying, this does present an opportunity for parents as well, doesn't it? And I have to admit, I didn't know what these 2 terms mean. So I'd love for you to sort of explain to us what structured and unstructured play is, and how teachers can kind of support parents with doing this at home. Can you just explain that for us?
Sure. So if I think about, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Is that okay? Yeah. If we think about structured and unstructured play, I think within our work that we do at YCIS ECE, we would think of play that is more structured would be kind of play that is supported, being really supported by an adult. So when teachers notice that children are really engaging in a topic or an interest really deeply, they can see opportunities for growth, they can see opportunities to extend learning and develop skills and really solidify their understanding, and equip children with the skills, like Clayton mentioned, problem solving, critical and creative thinking. That would be kind of where in our context, it would look a little bit more structured. So teachers would be stepping in, they would be asking really intentional questions to extend learning, to engage thinking, to broaden thinking and help children to become open-minded in their thinking and their ideas. And as opposed to unstructured play would be children really initiating the play on their own. So children really walking into a classroom that is inviting and engaging and set up really interestingly so that they immediately want to just jump in and get playing. And that's when we see the interests really coming up. And we see what children are capable of, we see what children are interested in, and the areas that teachers can then move forward to develop those skills and knowledge. So within our context, I think structured and unstructured play in a general context might look different to our context, where some schools or families approach structured play where it's very directed by an adult, whereas within our context, we partner with children rather than kind of forcefully directing them to think or play in a certain way.
That sounds so important. I want to zoom out for a minute though and come back to Kerry. You were talking about, children back in the 70s and technology. And I mean, that in the last year, technology has become so important with how everyone kind of stays connected and communicates, and especially for teachers and students. But in the context of kind of this changing world, Kerry, how do phones and technology, they play such a huge part in our lives, but how is childhood development changing?
That's a very interesting question, Laura. And I think that's a very tough one. And I think people have been asking that question when TV first came in, and probably even earlier with the printing press. And to a certain extent, society is responding in a very similar way. Now, how do we need to prepare children in this digital world? One way I look at it is that children need to be even more prepared to read and to be numerate, and they need to be able to discern what is important, what is real, probably much earlier than they did in the past. So I think what Clayton was saying before, in terms of the need to be creative and what we hear about from some local kindergarten is that, yes, initially, when children come from a very play-based education in kindergarten, they have some difficulties adjusting to perhaps more local curriculum in the first year or in perhaps even the first 2 years, but they do pick up. But what we know from math research, for example, is that depending on things like socioeconomic differences, some of these initial differences can remain and accumulate throughout the school year. So I think there's a balance that needs to be struck between perhaps more traditional form of pedagogy versus a more perhaps play-based pedagogy. I think a determining factor is, for parents in particular, is that what kind of future are we preparing children for? Are we preparing children for a system that is very competitive, very examination-driven, and that we need to prepare our children very early on for those kind of eventualities, or are we preparing children for a system where examinations do not play such an important role? So I think some of those early pedagogies need to take into account something probably won't happen until 10 or 12 years down the track. And it's tough for parents.
And when you strip it back, though, whether you were born in the 80s or 70s or you're born, today, are children just the same, or has technology kind of shifted the way we learn, for example?
I think from a fundamental biological perspective, children don't, as human beings, we don't change that fast. So the fundamentals are very, very similar to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But our interaction with the world and what we learn perhaps even the speed with which we learn has probably changed quite a bit. So if we look at a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old today versus a 6 versus 7-year-old, perhaps 20, 30 years ago, I think what they know will be quite different.
And Amy Lee, moving ahead and looking towards the next year, there's no doubt that technology has become a huge part of our lives and probably will stay that way for the time to come. How does technology and digital play, how can that be a positive influence in a child's life?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. I think I was just reflecting the other day, we're coming up to the year mark of this type of learning. It was a year ago almost that we began our online program, particularly at YCIS. And just thinking back, it's definitely made us think more creatively and pushed us out of our box of thinking in early childhood education in terms of how we can support children through various platforms, whether they are face-to-face on campus or whether they are at home with their families. And I think that through the use of different platforms, we really have been able to support the teaching and learning so that it has moved forward over the last year, that teachers have still been able to monitor learning and assess learning and equip children with the skills going forward between face-to-face time and the online learning. I think too, technology has been one of the platforms that we've made use of, and it really has facilitated connection. So we all know some of us are, away from families, or distanced from learning. We have still been able to connect. Just the fact that we're able to meet together like this today is amazing. So really in facilitating connections and making sure that stays, that children stay connected to the adults that are teaching them, so they're teachers, that has been a real positive for us. I think that children have been able to still keep connections with their peers, so their classmates, through online platforms. And our teachers really have been really creative in using the functions on various platforms. So we use Zoom often, and I was observing a 3-year-old class, and the teacher was making use of the whiteboard function. So the children were still able to kind of be active and engaged within the lesson. It wasn't just them on opposite sides of the screen, but they were able to they were drawing and doing some mark making, which is part of early literacy. So it was really great to see that teachers are using, we have a function on an app that we use called Seesaw, and teachers voice note young children. So before children know how to write and read, they're still able to connect by voice noting with their teachers. And this has really been greatly positive in the work that we have been doing, because relationships are so important to us at YCIS and the work that we do. I think that I'd still advocate for active play, children really experiencing play, hands-on. I really do personally feel that is the best learning that children can have in the most meaningful way that they can attain knowledge and skills. So I really agree with Kerry. He mentioned earlier that there really needs to be a balance between like the digital technology side and the hands-on active learning and play. And I would really, I think that's really important to remember going forward, that yes, we have all of this available to us in technology and apps and platforms and the whole various new world, but to really keep that balance for young children. And I would encourage the adults to be the ones that are really making use of the technology. Since everything has moved online, there's so many resources available to adults for support, to understand children. There's webinars, there's conferences, there's blogs, there's loads of ideas that parents and families and adults can make use of. And I would encourage them to be the ones making the most use of technology to help them during this time, because Kerry mentioned his work earlier as well that he did in the research, and I think it is so important that schools are supporting families, and if we can use technology to support families, we're ultimately supporting the children, and for me that's the greatest positive that can come out.
That's definitely sounds so interesting, and going back to you, Clayton, picking up from what Amy Lee was saying, that I think the hope is at some point to re-enter the classroom, but it will be doing so having online learned for a year. So I just want to ask you, will schools kind of retain elements of the teaching methods that they have come up with, like some of the stuff that Amy Lee had just said, when they do re-enter the classroom, whenever that may be?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer this question in two parts, if that's right, because Kerry spoke about something which I really agreed with, and I just want to just build on that and then build into the second part of the question. Kerry just mentioned the importance of really tying together play and some of those crucial skills that the reading, writing, numeracy, math, and I think that's something that is so important. And when choosing schools is really understanding the movement from ECE through to secondary. I know when we have a look at the IB learner profile, for example, for those parents that are looking way into the future, they speak about thinkers, inquirers, communicators, and all of those, but they also understand that there's a real importance for math and science and for humanities. And for us, what we've really been able to do at YCS in what Kerry was speaking about is really incorporate both of these together. So children are developing all of those learner profile, the imagination, as well as those more academic skills, where we see children in our IB program achieving the highest level, 45 in the IB diploma. So I think that carries really onto an important point, and just tying that into, so how do we take this time that we've been in now, and how do we take from this, and how do we ensure that going into the future we really learn from this time? And there are three things that stand out for me. The first is for us on any given morning on a normal regular school year, you'll come into our classrooms and there'll be parents in our classrooms, parents that are reading books, that are interacting with children. It's really this learning community. And of course, with COVID-19, we haven't been able to do that. But what we have done is we've really introduced, made use of Seesaw, online communication platform, where we've built relationships with families. And I think going forward, we'll continue to use that. Over the years, we've had feedback from families that aren't able to come into our classrooms because work demands that they're at work at a certain time, and they've really missed out. Through using Seesaw, we're able to connect with parents a lot better. We're able to do some of the individualized home learning. We speak about the importance in a play-based program to ensure that we are aware of every child and supporting every child in their individual journey, because every child is different and every child's moving at a different speed through their own journey. So that's really going to be something that we'll be drawing on in the future and enhancing our program, as well as just the connectivity and the ease of communicating with families. We hosted our parent-teacher conferences via Zoom, and parents just shared how easy that was, and it helps us to connect with families a lot more frequently. Also, just in returning to school, Amy spoke a little bit about how children were so settled coming into school, and we found that children were picking up a really strong relationship with their class teachers through the Zoom time, and we wanted to reflect on how we could potentially use Zoom as a mechanism to try and build those relationships, so that our separation time where children come to school without adults, without their primary caregivers, that we can shorten that. So I think that technology has brought new opportunities for us to reflect upon. We know that some of our classes have done some amazing trips to zoos and field trips to NASA and to all these different parts of the world that we didn't necessarily engage with before. So we'll certainly be taking a lot of that. But I think the key standout is our connection and our collaboration, the homeschool partnership.
And kind of picking up on what you said right at the beginning of this conversation about holistic learning and how that's been a key part of your program. Can you just sort of talk about that? Because mental health has been such a big thing this year when, we are at home and, people can feel isolated and, why is that important and how have you built it into your program?
So we at YCS, we're really privileged to have a big team, and we have Angela and Miss Wendy, who's part of our SSS team, who work very close with, that's a student support services team that work very closely with our school counselor. And we've really worked closely, and Amy, our assistant principal, putting together a program for children and for teachers and also for parents. We've realized that well-being has been it's needed to be center because of all the constant changes. And our team has really worked hard. For us internally as a team, we've had to adapt frequently. For our teachers, transitioning away from some of the things we were doing, creating opportunities for teachers to talk, to reflect. We find that when our team's able to be heard, listened to be able to express some of the frustrations and for us to respond to that, that's really been valuable and important, as well as the work that we're doing with our life skills with our children. I don't know if Amy wants to expand on that because she's really been heavily involved in that.
Just to add that we really have noticed that that our focus has needed to be on supporting families. So we've creative platforms, fellowships, book clubs, times where families can really just come together to share how they're feeling, to support and encourage each other, and for us to offer as much support as we can. We know a lot of parents have been trying to work from home or having their children at home at the same time, and that makes for a very busy household. So we really have done as much as we can, and we continue to reflect on that process of how can we support families. Because as I said earlier, if we can make sure that we're supporting parents and we are helping them to cope during this time, and we're equipping them with the skills that they need to partner with us in the learning for their children, then ultimately we're doing the best that we can for young children. So we just continue to reflect and focus our work on making sure, of course, our teachers and our children's well-being are taken care of, but we've been really intentional about the work that we've done in supporting parents as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Time has literally flown by. I see Eva's popped back up, and I think we've got some questions from people who've been tuning in. So I'll hand back to Eva now.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, we do have a few questions from the audience. I'll start off with Alice Wu. She's asking, what is the balance between creativity and doing the rules of the assignment? For instance, stacking rings in size order versus freely arranging it.
So I don't, is that Kerry? Maybe you want to, and then Clayton. Should we do that? Kerry, first of all, how do you want to respond?
Okay. Wow. So should the child stack rings in size order or freely arrange them? I think it really depends on what the assignment is. So I mean, if we're looking at older children where there's a very distinct and specified marking guide, if you like, I think freely arranging those rings will probably not be advisable unless that is indeed the assignment. So I think it very much depends on what is the aim of the exercise, the age of the child, and what is the purpose of this. But if we kind of step back a little bit, and if the question really is, what is the balance between creativity, encouraging creativity versus encouraging the following of rules, I think to a certain extent, schools have not departed from the original aims of schooling. Parts of very early childhood education is to prepare children for schools. So learning to do school, if you like, is an important aspect of early schooling. And socialization, being able to get along with other children, is a large part of that. And that's perhaps one part that is a little bit more difficult to realize with online learning that we have today. But I don't know, maybe Amy Lee can say something about that.
Could I carry on with that? Because I think you bring up a great point. I think something that we didn't bring up today, which probably should have been brought up, is the importance of child-centered learning. Now, I know that concept is not only an early childhood concept. I know that, for example, the IB, which goes right through to the high school leaving diploma, they focus on child-centered learning, which where they speak about agency, the importance of voice, choice, and ownership. So for us, really, we have these certain areas we're looking to focus on. So we want to ensure that children are developing holistically. Now, their pathway to developing, so if we're talking about stacking, I'm probably going to guess that one of the early childhood goals that we might be looking at there might be mathematical concept and awareness of bigger and smaller. So for us, we're not necessarily as interested in the activity as we are interested in the learning concept. So for our teachers, they would be reflecting more on, is this child showing us that they're able to showcase the skill or the understanding of the concept of bigger to smaller? So that's really what our teachers will be doing. And that's why it ties into child-centered learning, where the activity is not as important as the underlying skills that children are learning and developing.
The next question is by Ava Mazaki, which he asked, based in IB learning normally incorporates a lot of activities for children to learn scientific language and math knowledge. It's very hard to do at home, especially when the caretakers at home during the day are either their grandparents or helpers. What should parents do to help children catch up on the progress they have lost? As well as, it's quite impossible for parents to redo what the children have been taught in online classes after a whole day of work. Wow. So over to you, Amy. Do you want to take a stab?
Sure. You broke up a little bit for me, Eva, but so just correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction with answering the question. But from what I heard was kind of supporting ideas and learning around maths concepts for children at home, especially after a long day at work for families. And I can completely relate to that aspect. I have a child in year 1 who is currently doing online learning. And of course, I'm still working full time, and to go home and to focus on reading and writing and maths and counting and all of that, I can completely relate to how you are feeling as a parent. But just in terms of concepts like mathematical concept, early number concept, so much of that can be done through regular routines at home. Allow your child to join whoever's cooking a meal in the kitchen. Talk about the size of the ingredients that you're using. Look at recipes together. Allow them to help you to count out recipes together. In the bath, there's loads of opportunities for capacity exploration. So put some recycled containers into the bath and let your child explore filling and emptying and measuring and pouring and things like that. I'm not sure how old your child is, but yeah, there's so much in routines that can happen. Dinner time, look at the time that you have dinner, write it down every day, and then over a week have a look and see, oh, did we eat dinner at the same time every day this week? So thinking just how you can incorporate those mathematical concepts just during normal routines at home. And as a parent, be kind to yourself. It is a really difficult time that everybody is going through at the moment. And I know that all the teachers that I've spoken to, and I was on the same conference as Clayton this past week, just talking to loads of leaders and educators around the world. Around the world, educators know that children are learning in a different way. So they're understanding the change in development, they're understanding the rate of progress. So everything is understood. And as parents, we can just do what we can during this time.
Okay, the next question is by Christy Chung, and this is a very practical one. During the extended schools closure throughout the year and more to come, a lot of the teaching, observing, interactivity normally carried out in classrooms are shifted to parents. My child's school uses at least 3 different platforms: Learning App, Google Classroom, emails, and other online portals for specific subjects to communicate with parents and students, which can be very overwhelming, unclear, and frustrating at times. It's also difficult to keep track of the children's progress for parents. What are your suggestions for parents to manage the communication, the tasks children are assigned, and how do parents encourage this play-based learning at home?
I can answer. Eva, would you mind just muting your microphone? I don't know if
Yes.
this is or Laura, because we can hear quite a lot of feedback coming through. So that is a great question. For us, I suppose that's a question to take back to your school first of all. For us at YCS, we try to separate the child's learning, where we put all of that communication amongst teachers, the home learning activities, that interaction is all in Seesaw, a centralized place. And then we have, through our school app, everything related to more formalized communication from our administrative team. So I think it's really important. Probably early 2020, when we first started, we were probably doing what some other schools are doing, where we had Gmail and all different functions, and it became really overwhelming because teachers were trying to keep track of all these different online platforms and parents and children, and it really was quite clumsy. So we brought it all together, and that's really been valuable. In terms of play at home, I think it's really, we speak a lot about creating a yes environment. I'd encourage families to read some books by Janet Lansbury, Magda Gerber, Susan Stacy's got some great work on emergent literacy, Heather Schumacher. So it's really, when we're at home, and if you find yourself saying to your child all the time, no, be careful, stay safe, that's glass, don't touch that, they're really getting this message of, what can I do? And we're really saying to children, don't do anything. Just and they're not positioned to be able to engage in their creativity. So what we really encourage families to do is find a part of your house that you can transform into an environment that you know that 99% of what they do there is going to be safe. There's nothing that's breakable. It's a safe environment. And then children can really take ownership of that part of their home. And that's where children can start engaging in their imagination, because they know that they're not going to be interrupted by a safety issue every couple of minutes. So I think that's a really good starting point of creating a yes environment in your home.
I know we're a little bit over, but there's one last question, so I want to ask that question. It's by Christy Chung. It's by Peter Matthews. I'm a stay-at-home dad with 2 young children. How can parents best prepare themselves to create a play-based learning for their young child when schools are shut? This is quite similar to the last one, but I thought if, for example, Carrie or Amy can take a stab as well.
Perhaps I'll start and Carrie can add in anything that I might have missed. Yeah, having young children at home is a really exciting time, especially if you have time as a parent to create what Clayton was talking about as a yes environment. Just to expand a little bit on some more ideas from what Clayton has already shared, I would definitely encourage the yes environment. I would also really look at as many open-ended materials as you can find. That really allows children to engage in extended periods of time. It allows them to develop their creativity and their critical thinking skills, and really just explore their own ideas. So things like loads of things that are recyclable. So I'm a huge fan of cardboard boxes. And I know we are all ordering things online a lot more these days. So keep those cardboard boxes, pop them into your children's play area, cut some holes in them so that they can put things in and out. Use empty bottles, things that children can take lids off of and put things in. Children love to hide things. They love to create, keep things together. So loads of open-ended materials, corks, bells, pom-poms, anything that children can create with art, paper, paint. And I know some families aren't a huge fan of sensory play or messy play, but just 2 ideas really quickly for messy play that isn't too messy, and that is dried oatmeal. So if you can get an old shower curtain and put that on the floor, and put some dry oatmeal with maybe some measuring cups from the kitchen or some spoons or spatula or paintbrushes, children can spend ages engaged in dry oatmeal. And if all else fails, a bath or a tub in the bath filled with water, pop your Lego or your Duplo in there, and your children will be busy for ages.
Well, if I can add to that and combine it with the earlier question about numeracy, one thing that research has shown that is really good for developing children's early numeracy skills is board game, traditional board game. Throwing a die, counting out the number of steps. That's a fabulous thing that children enjoy, adults can enjoy as well, and you can play together.
Great idea.
And there are online games as well that are specifically developed for developing children's numeracy skills. So that's also available. Even things like this is going back a few years now. Angry birds. I think you have to look at different size birds. Get noticing the numeracy and the magnitude differences out there is a very important aspect of early numeracy skills. And even just bring the child's attention to, that one is bigger than the other one. Something that Amy Lee said before is the vital importance of a vital ingredient in developing children's early numeracy skills.
Great. Well, it seems like that's all the time we have. So I'd like to thank Clayton, Amy Lee, Professor Carey for their valuable insights, and Laura for moderating the panel. The conversation doesn't stop here. Please join us on Facebook to connect with other parents. You can scan the QR code that appears on your screen right now. See you then.